I've never been hypnotized, and I've never practiced hypnosis. In grad school, I was offered the opportunity to attend a multi-day training on how to use hypnosis in therapy, but I passed. Yeah, it was too expensive. But also, if I'm being honest with myself, I have a little bit of a bias against hypnosis. I just don't really get it, you know? It never made sense to me. Like, sure, I've seen magicians on stage hypnotize people, but it just seems like a gimmick. Like, you really want me to believe that in just a few minutes you put my buddy Nate into a trance and made him bark like a dog? But of course, I know that there's more to hypnosis than what you see in the movies, saying, "You're getting very sleepy," while swinging a pocket watch is just a silly stereotype. I've heard stories from people who have told me that they've benefited from hypnosis. Just a couple weeks ago, when I mentioned that I was making this video, a good friend of mine told me that he underwent hypnosis as part of his therapy. He said it was nice, but is it real? I've always been a skeptic of hypnosis, whether it's fair or not, but a curious skeptic. So, if you'll entertain my curiosity, I want to get to the bottom of this. So don't take your eyes off this screen, because in order to get to the bottom, we need to go deeper, deeper, deeper. This video was sponsored by Brilliant. Depending on which circles you run in, hypnosis might seem like a sort of new agey practice that's wheedled its way into mental health treatment by means of hippie therapists who you wish for your aunt. But it might surprise you, like it did me, that hypnotherapy actually predates modern psychotherapy. Now, I guess I should clarify, I'm not talking about hypnotic trances in general. Those go back thousands of years. For example, in ancient Egypt, there were these things called sleep temples, where priests would induce a trance-like state through chanting, music, and sensory deprivation so that people could seek healing through their dreams. And there's ancient Hindu and Chinese practices that are intended to induce an altered state of consciousness through meditation, breath control, and focused attention so that individuals can reach spiritual enlightenment or balance the flow of qi in their body. Honestly, it seems like shaman, medicine women, and spiritual leaders have induced hypnotic trances for practically all of human history. But no, I mean it when I say that hypnosis, as a form of therapy, came first, 100 years before Freud. And it all started with this guy, Franz Anton Mesmer, the grandfather of modern hypnotism. Anton Mesmer was a 1700s German physician who often found himself on the fringes of Western medicine. After studying Isaac Newton's ideas about how the sun and moon affect ocean tides, he wondered to himself, could these celestial bodies also be messing with our bodies? That's really how he talked. No, he didn't. This ended up being the whole focus of his doctoral dissertation, titled "On the Influence of the Planets on the Human Body." It was like medical astrology. In the dissertation, he proposed that the positioning of the planets influenced our health and behavior. His theory was that gravity from the planets influenced a small-scale gravity found within every organism. But unlike the gravity that you and I know and love, Mesmer conceptualized of gravity as a universal energy, and those who suffered from illness or disease must have a gravitational imbalance. But the balance could be restored through treatments that supposedly manipulated a person's internal gravity. In any case, after completing his degree, Mesmer started practicing as a doctor and quickly abandoned that idea forever. Or did he? Several years down the line, while consulting with the Jesuit priest Maximilian Hell regarding a patient grappling with hysteria, Hell recounted an anecdote in which he used a magnet to treat a patient's illness. This approach, now called magnet therapy, often involves applying iron magnets, like the magnets found on your fridge, to the surface of the skin to heal various medical conditions. It's worth mentioning that magnet therapy is a pseudoscience, but it's still active as an alternative medicine today. You can get all sorts of wristbands, blankets, or even magnetized water. Don't waste your money. But given Mesmer's interest in the power of invisible forces, he was intrigued and promptly experimented with magnet therapy on his hysterical patient. As he moved the magnets around the woman's skin, she reported feeling streams of a mysterious fluid through her body, and by the end, she said her symptoms had disappeared. The magnet therapy worked. But Mesmer felt like something else was going on. It wasn't just the magnets. It was him. He could control the flow of this fluid, which cured this poor, hysterical woman. Although her symptoms did come back a few hours later. But anyway, I feel like hysteria keeps cropping up in these deep dive videos, and I think it could make for a really great video topic, but you let me know down in the comments if you'd be interested in something like that. This experience led Mesmer to develop a bizarre theory known as animal magnetism. Now, animal magnetism might sound like what you try to convince your friends you have in the bedroom, but what it actually describes is Mesmer's idea that there's an invisible force or energy or fluid that exists in all things, sort of like traditional Chinese concept of qi. But in Mesmer's case, this force was essentially a kind of magnetic field that every living organism possessed, and it was responsible for the functioning of the body and the mind, and therefore, physical and mental illnesses were the result of disruptions or imbalances to the flow of animal magnetism. Does this sound familiar? Yeah, it's essentially just a rebrand of his dissertation topic. Funny enough, when it appeared in his dissertation, he called it animal gravitation, but now it's magnetic. Mesmer pretty quickly stopped using magnets as part of his treatment because he believed that certain individuals, such as himself, have significantly more animal magnetism than others, which allowed him to manipulate others' animal magnetism at will. He didn't need the magnets anymore because now he was the magnet. In an attempt to gain legitimacy and to escape scrutiny about his inappropriate relationships with female patients, Mesmer moved to Paris, where he refined his technique. In sessions, he'd cozy up knees to knees with the patient and stare right into their eyes. And then he'd make magnetic passes in which he would move his hands around the body of the patient in a repetitive motion in order to redirect animal magnetism to the affected part of the body. After sessions that would sometimes last hours, patients were mesmerized. Yep, that's where this term comes from. And he even called his manipulation of animal magnetism mesmerism. He rapidly gained a fervent following. I mean, it's hard to understate just how influential his healing practices were at the time. He even treated Marie Antoinette. But his success went to his head. You see, Mesmer lived an opulent lifestyle, which often involved dressing in a flowing purple robe and golden shoes. He loved the arts and apparently was a friend and financial supporter of Mozart, which is kind of random. But as throngs of people began asking for his services, Mesmer couldn't keep up. He couldn't do one-on-one sessions for everyone. So instead, he developed a way to do his work in bulk. He created a contraption called a baquet, which was simply a covered, shallow wooden tub filled with magnetized water with iron rods that stuck out of it and were bent at 90-degree angles. It was such a large barrel that apparently up to 30 people could sit around it, at which point they would hold hands to channel their animal magnetism, or they could grab one of the metal rods and apply it to the body part that required healing. Just reading about the accounts of this experience sound wild.
His patients were received with the air of mystery and studied effect. The apartment, hung with mirrors, was dimly lit. A profound silence was observed, broken only by strains of music which occasionally floated through the rooms. The patients were seated around a sort of vat which contained a heterogeneous mixture of chemical ingredients. With this and with each other, they were placed in relation by means of cords or jointed rods, or by holding hands, and among them slowly and mysteriously moved Mesmer himself, affecting one by a touch, another by a look, a third by passes with his hand, a fourth by pointing with a rod. One person became hysterical, then another. One was seized with cataplexy, others with convulsions, some with palpitations of the heart, perspirations, and other bodily disturbances.
But with popularity came scrutiny. When King Louis XVI learned about Mesmer and his practices, he appointed a royal commission to investigate animal magnetism. The panel was comprised of renowned, just rock star scientists, including the chemist that identified the elements of oxygen and hydrogen, the physician who invented the guillotine, and Benjamin frickin' Franklin, who happened to be the French ambassador at the time. These three then conducted multiple experiments, including perhaps the earliest example of a blind experiment. In that one, they literally blindfolded a group of women and then asked them to indicate the direction of magnetic fluid flow by a mesmerist. In another, a patient reported feeling mesmerized after drinking plain water that he'd falsely been told was mesmerized. Experiment after experiment, the effects of mesmerism disappeared or were no more effective than sham interventions. The commission's report concluded that
this agent, fluid, has no existence.
It was all placebo effect, and the observed effects of animal magnetism were simply the result of the healer's influence on the patient and the power of suggestion. In a last-ditch effort to save his reputation, Mesmer offered to mesmerize a horse as evidence that animal magnetism is real. But in the end, he gave up the ghost, left Paris, moved back to Germany, and lived the rest of his life in seclusion. Sorry, I didn't realize I was going to spend so much time talking about Mesmer. Although he was an interesting character, Mesmer's practices of inducing trance-like states would more importantly inspire many other practitioners after him who evolved his ideas into hypnotism as we know it today. You see, while Mesmer gravitated to the fringes of medicine where mysticism and the occult lived, many others did the hard work of separating the empirical from the magical. 50 years after Anton Mesmer faded into the background, a successful and well-respected Scottish surgeon named James Braid attended a traveling mesmerist show. Having read into the research on mesmerism, Braid was essentially convinced that animal magnetism didn't exist. But, out of sheer curiosity, he went anyway. What he saw challenged his assumptions. After mesmerizing his participants, the traveling performer, Charles LaFontaine, would shock them with batteries and burn them with candles. But they didn't react. Braid went to another show a week later and saw LaFontaine mesmerize volunteers, making them unable to open their eyes. LaFontaine even invited Braid up on stage to physically examine them. By the end, he was convinced that some real physical change had happened, but it had nothing to do with magnets. Braid began secretly conducting his own mesmerist experiments with his wife, a friend, a servant, and even some patients. You see, mesmerism at the time was seen as a pseudoscience in the medical field, and Braid didn't want to be associated with that supernatural stuff until he had something legitimate to present. What he found through his work was that intense fixation on a small, bright object held 8 to 15 inches in front of the eyes and slightly above the forehead could induce a trance state often seen in mesmerism. He tried this with various items such as a shiny plated top of a wine cork, the flame of a candle, a small mirror, and yes, a swinging pocket watch. But although it's now cliche, there's nothing special about a pocket watch. It functions just as well as any other shiny object, but somehow it became Hollywood shorthand for hypnosis.
Listen carefully. Here's what I want you to do.
I want you to relax every muscle in your body.
In 60 seconds, your eyelids will grow heavy. So heavy that you will be obliged to close them.
And when I clap my hands twice, you will wake up. Do you understand?
Yes.
Now, sink into the floor.
Wait.
Sink.
From these experiments, Braid believed that straining the eye muscles was the mechanism that unlocked this altered consciousness, and must explain why the participants from LaFontaine's performance couldn't open their eyes. And therefore, what entranced the volunteers were not the magnetic passes or the magical power of LaFontaine, but instead, the participants' fixed stare on the mesmerist's eyes. After several months of study, Braid compiled his findings and wrote a book about the new practice. Can I just say as an aside, James Braid seemed like an admirable scientist and just like a cool dude. Here's a quote from his book, Neurohypnology, or the Rationale of Nervous Sleep.
I have now entirely separated hypnotism from animal magnetism. I consider it to be merely a simple, speedy and certain mode of throwing the nervous system into a new condition, which may be rendered eminently available in the cure of certain disorders. I trust therefore it may be investigated quite independently of any bias, either for or against the subject, as connected with mesmerism, and only by the facts which can be adduced. I feel quite confident we may have acquired in this process a valuable addition to our curative means, but I repudiate the idea of holding it up as a universal remedy, nor do I even pretend to understand as yet the whole range of diseases in which it may be useful.
I don't know, I think it says a lot that he welcomed research and didn't call it a panacea. I mean, maybe that's a low bar, but you see that a lot with founders of new medical techniques. In any case, the book outlines 25 different case studies where he successfully used hypnosis as a treatment for headaches, pain relief, mobility issues, and stroke complications, as well as using it for anesthesia. He even shared examples where hypnosis didn't work to demonstrate its limitations. Again, cool dude. A couple years later, he also discovered how to self-induce a hypnotic state and shared his self-hypnosis methods with others. Although he originally called it neurohypnology, which is a horrible word to pronounce, he eventually adopted the term hypnosis. Hypnos is the Greek word for sleep, and although he later learned that hypnosis has nothing to do with sleep, the name stuck, and Braid was never able to change it to the more accurate term that he tried to popularize, which is monoideism. Also a horrible word to pronounce. Braid is often considered the first hypnotherapist, and if Mesmer is the grandfather of hypnosis, then Braid most certainly is the father. Out of his work, hypnosis gained a lot of attention, both in research and in clinical utility. There was a great debate about what hypnosis was, which is actually a debate we'll talk about soon. But one idea that gained significant traction was the theory that hypnosis is a heightened state of suggestibility. The founder of the theory, French physician Hippolyte Bernheim, believed that hypnosis could be a powerful tool for use in psychotherapy, which is a term that he popularized to describe the way that the mind could heal the body through hypnotism by wielding language, the doctor's influence, and the raw power of the patient's brain over their body. It might not surprise you then to hear that Sigmund Freud actually came to study with Bernheim in 1889 and sat in on sessions where he used psychotherapy with patients. I think it's fair to say that this greatly influenced Freud's development of psychoanalysis, which early on involved the use of hypnosis in therapy to draw out repressed memories and to access the unconscious. But later, he moved away from it in favor of his own technique called free association. There's a ton of history that I haven't covered and won't cover because I've already taken enough of your precious time, and honestly, it's just not as exciting. But to breeze over the last 100 years or so, hypnosis continued to develop and gain popularity throughout the 20th century as a therapeutic technique within psychology, medicine, and dentistry even. It became quite popular as a stage performance too, in which hypnotists induced trances in volunteers to make them do embarrassing things in front of an audience. Unlike therapeutic hypnosis, which is what we'll be focusing on today, particularly its use in a mental health context, stage hypnosis is all for entertainment. Which brings us to modern day. And as much as I'd love to talk about history all day long, history doesn't necessarily explain what hypnosis is, both in terms of what the actual hypnosis process looks like and like what the heck is actually going on. So let's do that. In the simplest terms, hypnosis involves a therapist guiding a client into a deeply relaxed state, and then using that state to promote positive changes or to address the client's specific issues. So in practice, sessions can last anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour, maybe even longer. And while hypnosis can be administered as a standalone therapy, it's most often used by therapists and other medical professionals in conjunction with other forms of treatment. Regardless, the process of hypnotizing someone generally follows several steps. What I'm about to describe is the most popular form of hypnosis, but bear in mind that there are a lot of variations to achieve the same result. The first step we can call the preparation stage. This is where the therapist builds rapport with the client and gets them comfortable with the idea of hypnosis by doing things like explaining the process or dispelling myths or misconceptions, as well as discussing the goals for session with the client so that they feel comfortable and safe. The second step is called induction. Now, during this stage, the therapist's goal is to help the client relax and block out other distractions. They might do this by using any combination of techniques or exercises, such as focusing on a specific point or object, as we talked about earlier. It could also include relaxation techniques like deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, or the use of calming language and imagery. Typically, the therapist will use verbal repetition as a way of keeping the person focused on what they're saying. The next step is commonly called deepening. This stage builds off of the induction stage by intensifying the client's relaxation and concentration. The therapist encourages the client to delve deeper into their state of relaxation through visualization techniques, like picturing themselves walking down stairs or sinking into a comfy bed. The therapist might also employ countdowns by telling the client to relax further with each descending number. Once the client is sufficiently relaxed, they are now considered hypnotized. And now that they're here, the suggestion stage can begin. And this is where the real therapeutic process happens. At this point, the therapist gives therapeutic suggestions in order to alleviate symptoms or to encourage positive changes to a person's behaviors, beliefs, or emotions. So, for example, let's say a client comes to receive hypnosis in order to stop smoking. The therapist might suggest that the client will no longer find smoking pleasurable or necessary when they wake up. Or they might use some suggestive imagery, such as asking the client to imagine themselves standing in front of a mirror where on one side they see their old self with black lungs, and on the other side they see their new, healthy self with clean lungs. The therapist would then ask the client to identify which version of themselves they prefer, and then have them walk toward that version. Or let's say a client struggles with anxiety. The therapist might say things that suggest that the client will experience a newfound sense of calmness and confidence when they awake. Or maybe they'll have them imagine themselves sailing on a tranquil lake where they'll find inner peace. If you want to see this in action, I'll actually link to a few videos of recorded sessions at the top of the Google Doc that lists all of my sources. It's just down in the description there. Eventually, when the hypnosis work is done, the therapist then gently guides the client back to full wakefulness and reinforces a positive, optimistic mindset as part of the reorientation stage. Now, Coming out of a hypnotic state doesn't take long, or at least it doesn't have to. And once out of the trance, the therapist might discuss the experience, allow the client to share any insights or feelings that came up, and then plan for next steps. That's pretty much the whole thing. People who've been hypnotized generally say it's a pleasant experience. They'll often describe feeling like they're in a flow state where they're fully aware of their surroundings, but able to block out distractions. Sort of like how you might get absorbed in a really good book or movie. And like with a book or movie or YouTube video, even though people report feeling intently focused, they also share feeling calm and relaxed during hypnosis. This is very different from most popular media portrayals of hypnosis, which tend to make it seem kinda magical, but there's nothing mystical or supernatural about it. Contrary to common misconceptions, you can't be hypnotized against your will. And when you're hypnotized, the hypnotist is not controlling your mind, and they can't make you do anything that you might find disagreeable or reprehensible or illegal. You're not unconscious during hypnosis, and you're not asleep. You remember pretty much everything that happens. That is, unless you're told to expect hypnotic amnesia. What I'm trying to say is, you can't be secretly programmed into a political assassin.
I told them to build me an assassin. I wanted a killer from a world filled with killers, and they chose you.
Unless you wanna be. Joking aside though, there have been some concerns and issues brought up regarding the use of hypnosis as a tool in therapy. You see, back in the day, therapists thought that hypnosis broke down a person's defenses to unlock parts of their minds that they might normally keep safeguarded. And as such, it seemed to be this amazing tool for recovering and recalling lost memories. But while hypnosis does appear to make people more suggestible, which might make people more able to vividly recall events, it also heightens susceptibility to the formation of false memories. You see, when someone is under hypnosis, they're so receptive to the suggestions provided by the therapist that if the therapist uses leading questions or gives certain cues in session, even if they're unintentional, the client might completely make up entire memories. Rather than being more accurate, the client is instead prone to blending reality and imagination. We saw this in action en masse in the 80s and 90s during the infamous Satanic Panic, where hypnosis was regularly used by professionals in order to uncover repressed memories of satanic ritual abuse. Turned out to be totally fake. But all that aside, when I learned about the process of becoming hypnotized, I said to myself, that can't be it. I mean, hypnosis can't just be deep relaxation, right? Well, it appears the answer is no. It's not just relaxation. While relaxation-based induction is the most popular and widely used form of induction, there's also awake alert hypnosis, which doesn't involve relaxation, and instead uses eye fixation paired with hypnotic suggestions of attentiveness in order to induce a hypnotic state. There's even active alert hypnosis, in which hypnotic suggestions of activation and cognitive alertness can put people in a similar state of mind. In fact, I read a study that found that participants were just as responsive to hypnotic suggestions while strenuously riding a stationary bike as they were when hypnotized in a relaxing setting. So, if relaxation is not the explanation, then what's the actual mechanism that supposedly makes hypnosis work? What is hypnosis? Well, it's complicated. The simple answer is that we don't know. There is no consensus model used to explain hypnosis. However, most theories fall into one of two categories: state or non-state explanations. State theories propose that hypnosis involves an altered state of consciousness. So in other words, you're neither awake nor asleep but instead in this third state that enables these unique characteristics seen with hypnosis. On the other side of the coin, we have the non-state theories, which don't believe hypnosis is an altered state and instead view it as a social performance. So, let's explore the research a little bit and parse things out. If you read early research on hypnosis, a lot of it uses patient self-report to support its findings, and more often than not, the self-report seems to give evidence for the state theory. After hypnosis, individuals often describe experiencing alterations in consciousness, such as time distortion, dissociation from their surroundings, and a sense of detachment from their own actions or sensations. In general, there's pretty good consistency between people's experiences across individuals, so that seems to give some confidence to this being an actual state. But, of course, while self-report can offer some valuable insight into the experience, it can't stand on its own. Otherwise, Mesmer's animal magnetism would still be alive and well. So let's look at the biological side of things. fMRI, EEG, and PET scan studies seem to consistently show that the brains of people who are highly hypnotizable react differently to hypnosis and hypnotic suggestions compared to those who are very unlikely to be hypnotized. By the way, while I'm talking about it, it's worth mentioning that it's estimated that around 15 to 20% of the population are considered highly hypnotizable, while 15 to 20% are rarely hypnotizable, and the rest are just medium well done. But in any case, it appears that highly hypnotizable people experience significantly more theta waves during hypnosis. And interestingly, they also seem to experience more theta waves in general, like even when not hypnotized, when compared to those who are very unlikely to be hypnotized. Theta waves are a type of brain wave that an EEG measures, and they're often present in several other altered states of consciousness, such as during REM sleep. But they're also an important part of attention, decision-making, creative thinking, and memory formation. So, you might look at this and think that this really gives support for the idea that hypnosis induces a different state of consciousness. That said, changes in the brain occur for a wide range of reasons, including as part of performing a task or as a response to expectations. After all, the placebo effect can cause changes in the brain too. Theta waves also increase during meditation, or when you're really relaxed, or even when you're just quietly concentrating, which all seem to share similar characteristics to hypnosis. So, while hypnosis does have an impact on brain activity, it's not really conclusive evidence of it being a different state. And in fact, it's pretty much impossible for scientists to determine if a person is hypnotized simply by looking at their brain scans. There simply are not enough biological markers of a hypnotic state to distinguish it from other states. On the psychological side, behavioral studies have long been used in order to find markers of an altered state of consciousness by essentially identifying differences between hypnotized and unhypnotized individuals. The logic is that if hypnosis is truly a distinct state of consciousness, well then, hypnotized people would have a very distinct way of behaving, or perhaps even be able to do things that are otherwise impossible to do in the waking state. So, for example, one proposed marker of hypnotism or a hypnotic state is literalism, which is when a hypnotized individual responds to a question or a suggestion in a very literal manner. For instance, if asked, "Do you mind telling me your name?" they may reply with a simple, "No." The thought is that the hypnotized individuals lose their ability to fully grasp context, expressions, figures of speech, and deviations from the literal meanings of words. Another supposed marker is the hidden observer phenomenon. This was demonstrated by a study in which participants were asked to submerge one hand into a bucket of icy water, while the hypnotist told them that it would not hurt. However, They were also told that a hidden part of their mind would perceive the pain, and they could press a button with their other hand if it hurt. Surprisingly, the hypnotized people followed both suggestions. They verbally claimed not to feel the pain, but the longer that their hand was in the icy water, the more their other hand pressed the button. The explanation behind this is that because hypnosis induces a form of dissociation, part of the mind is still conscious, while the other part is separated by an amnestic barrier, and it will respond to suggestions very freely and openly. Yet another marker is trance logic, which is essentially like a logical glitch that happens with hypnotized people where they accept any ideas as true, even if they completely contradict one another. So, if a hypnotist tells a hypnotized person that they are deaf, and then asks them, "Can you hear me now?" the hypnotized person might reply, "No." The explanation of this marker is that hypnosis affects our critical evaluation skills and makes it difficult to experience cognitive dissonance. But of course, the most widely accepted behavioral marker of a hypnotic state is suggestibility. As I discussed earlier, it's believed that while hypnotized, people become far more compliant with a therapist's suggestions, which makes it a powerful therapeutic tool for changing or improving a person's thoughts or behaviors. And it's hypothesized that this happens because hypnosis essentially temporarily bypasses or suppresses certain cognitive processes like critical thinking, inhibition, and skepticism. These are just a few examples of markers, but hearing about all of them, it's clear to see why someone would view a hypnotic trance as an altered state of consciousness. However, when put under scientific scrutiny, it appears that these don't hold up. For example, with literalism, multiple studies have tried to replicate the initial research that identified it as a defining feature of hypnosis, but found no significant difference between hypnotized and unhypnotized individuals in terms of whether they respond to questions in a literal way. But what about the hidden observer phenomenon or trance logic and things like that? Well, in the 1960s, a new methodology called the real simulator design was developed to control for bias in hypnosis studies. This design involves two types of participants: the reals, which are people who are highly hypnotizable, and the simulators, which are people who are not easily hypnotized. Both go through a study that's conducted by an experimenter who is blind to the participants' hypnosis susceptibility. They don't know who's who. But prior to starting the study, the simulators, which are the people who are not easily hypnotized, are told to act as though they are highly hypnotizable. And they are also told that the experimenter will end the study if they're found to be faking it. So the beauty of this setup is that you can easily tell if there are any real differences between those who naturally undergo hypnosis and those who are just pretending. And if there are, then that's something genuine. But if their performances are pretty much identical, well, then perhaps the findings were simply the result of participants wanting to be a good subject. So when it comes to the hidden observer phenomenon and trance logic, the real simulator design has basically invalidated those findings, because when participants were told to pretend they were under hypnosis, they ended up showing the same behaviors as the genuinely hypnotized folks. What this tells us is that it's possible that these behaviors are more about what people expect, rather than being a built-in feature of the hypnotic state itself. Okay, then what about suggestion? Is everything a lie? Well, no, not completely. Most studies show that people who are hypnotized do appear to be more suggestible than someone who is not, about 10 to 20% more. On the other hand, there are some studies that show no difference in suggestibility at all when hypnotized. The research just isn't particularly clear at this point, but it does seem like hypnotic suggestibility is significantly higher in hypnosis. Regardless, after reviewing everything, I don't see particularly compelling evidence that hypnosis is, in fact, a different state of consciousness. Which means we have to examine the other side of the coin, the non-state explanation of hypnosis. This perspective views hypnosis not as a distinct, altered state of consciousness, but rather a kind of consensual role play. That might sound sexual, but it's not. Unless you want it to be. I'm kidding. According to this perspective, individuals who undergo hypnosis are not in a trance, but are instead influenced by their expectations, beliefs, and the social context of the hypnotic experience. I mean, think about how I described the beginning of the hypnosis process. It entails the therapist telling the client what to expect, breaking down misconceptions, and essentially getting the client into the correct mindset to receive hypnosis. So, when the client undergoes the hypnotic process, the non-state explanation would say that they adopt the role of a hypnotized person based on their understanding of what hypnosis entails, and based on the perceived authority of the hypnotist. What that means, then, is that the client is more receptive to suggestion because they believe they should be, not because of the hypnosis. Personally, I find the non-state perspective of hypnosis far more compelling, and this viewpoint appears to be widely shared among hypnosis researchers, particularly those in the younger generation. In addition to all of the conflicting evidence that I already discussed, a gaping hole in the altered state argument is that no one's been able to define a hypnotic trance in any meaningful way. As previously mentioned, there are no reliable physiological markers. But also, you can be trained or tricked to be more suggestible and hypnotizable. Numerous studies have investigated the effectiveness of programs that are aimed at enhancing people's receptiveness to hypnosis. These programs typically try to boost motivation for hypnosis, dispel misconceptions surrounding it, foster positive expectations, and also train people to respond to suggestions. Fascinatingly, 25 to 50% of participants transition from being not very suggestible to highly suggestible. Another study manipulated participant expectations by first testing their hypnotizability and then afterward providing them phony written feedback saying that they have an innate talent for hypnosis. Then later, while undergoing hypnosis, experimenters delivered suggestions such as, "You will see the room turn red," or "You might hear unusual music." And then they reinforced these expectations by subtly changing the color of the room or surreptitiously playing music. Afterward, the experimenters test participant hypnotizability, and the results are striking. A whopping 73% of participants scored as highly hypnotizable, and none fell into the low hypnotizable category. Even after being told about the deception, participants' scores didn't change. So yeah, it makes sense to me that if you're receptive to the idea of hypnosis, have expectations that it's going to work, and feel motivated to engage in it, then you will be hypnotized. That's not to say that people who are hypnotizable are naive or weak-minded. I mean, hypothetically, anyone can be hypnotized. And studies show that hypnotizability is unrelated to personality traits like gullibility, trust, submissiveness, and imagination. It also doesn't correlate to intelligence or even susceptibility to other social influence, such as misleading questions or peer pressure. There is some research showing hypnotizability is associated with absorption, like someone's ability to become really engrossed in activities like reading or listening to music or daydreaming, though even that research isn't conclusive. In the end, research indicates that the best predictor of hypnotic suggestibility is non-hypnotic suggestibility. You might be one of those people who is more suggestible, or maybe not, but as we know, a person's suggestibility can be manipulated. So, I've got something that I'd like to try to test your suggestibility. Now, I'll warn you, it's a little bit deceptive, but for this to work, it'll require your complete buy-in, okay? Ready? Make sure you're in a comfortable spot and fix your eyes on this watch. As you look at the watch, take several deep breaths. Allow the tension to melt away with each breath. As you continue to breathe deeply and steadily, imagine yourself in a place of tranquility and calmness. Now I want you to focus on the idea of growth. Imagine yourself as a curious and eager learner, open to new experiences and knowledge. Suddenly, a pathway appears in front of you. It's illuminated by bright light. With each step on that pathway, feel a sense of excitement and anticipation building within you. You feel ready to explore new ideas and concepts and skills. And as you get closer and closer to the source of this light, you peer up at it and you see it's brilliant. Not just brilliant light, but literally brilliant, the amazing online platform where you can learn STEM topics through fun and interactive lessons. Hey, I told you it was going to be deceptive, but honestly, you don't need to be hypnotized to see why Brilliant is so great. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in math, data analysis, programming, and AI. It doesn't matter if you're a total novice or already know a thing or two about these areas. Brilliant will help you build your grasp of the subject from the ground up. Now, I'm not the kind of person who can just learn from reading or watching other people doing something, but with Brilliant, every lesson has hands-on activities that allow me to figure out things using my critical thinking skills, not memorizing a bunch of text. I'm still working through their programming lessons to finally learn how to code, and I can actually tell that I'm building real knowledge. It's fun, convenient, and easy to do whenever I have the time. So, if you want to try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, then visit brilliant.org/neurotransmissions, or click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off the annual premium subscription. So, even though you're not hypnotized, take my suggestion and check it out today. It'll really help you, it helps me, and it helps the channel. Thanks, y'all. So if the non-state theories of hypnosis are correct, then what does that mean? Is hypnosis all fake? Well, no. Far from it. When I say that someone who is hypnotized is role-playing as a hypnotized person, I'm not implying that they're pretending. Expectations, beliefs, and social context are forces that affect so much of our lives. They directly impact our perceptions of reality. They influence our views on politics, or how much we like a bottle of wine, or our experience of other people's emotions, or even how we feel about ourselves. Those who undergo hypnosis genuinely experience the effects of suggestion. And we know this because they activate brain regions that correspond to the experiences being suggested. So for example, it's not uncommon for hypnotic suggestions to be able to produce strong changes in perceptions, including hallucinations. Not scary hallucinations, but hallucinations nonetheless. When a therapist induces a visual hallucination through suggestion, brain imaging studies show that the visual cortex lights up. Hypnosis, to me, simply seems like a discrete way of harnessing these forces for a therapeutic purpose. But the proof is in the pudding, and the research shows that hypnosis is not some quack treatment meant to waste your time and pick your pockets. But it also definitely isn't a panacea or a quick fix for whatever issue you're facing. Based on the studies and meta-analyses that I could find, hypnosis has demonstrated effectiveness in addressing conditions such as depression, anxiety, obesity, PTSD, IBS, and pain management, which includes everything from childbirth to post-surgery pain to chronic pain conditions to even headaches and migraines. In addition, it's also shown promise in soothing children who have needle-related distress, chemotherapy patients who struggle with nausea and vomiting, and individuals with psychosomatic disorders. Now, funny enough, part of the reason why I considered attending a hypnosis training in the first place was because I heard that it was effective for helping people with smoking cessation, helping people to stop smoking, right? My specialization was in addictions counseling, and so this seemed like it would be a pretty helpful tool. But in my research, I found very little evidence to support it. There's some, but nothing conclusive. I swear to God, when I was in grad school, hypnosis was advertised as a miracle cure for smoking. Now, it's worth mentioning that many of these results are not from using hypnosis as a standalone therapy, but rather using hypnosis in conjunction with other treatments, whether that's with another form of therapy or as part of a treatment program. I don't think that that discounts hypnosis, but it might indicate that it's better used as a tool rather than as a modality. A meta-analysis that was exploring studies in which clients received cognitive behavioral therapy augmented by hypnosis found that clients who received CBT in combination reported a 70% greater improvement than clients who received CBT on their own. So clearly, there's some merit to this whole hypnosis thing. That's not to say that hypnosis research doesn't have issues. Many studies have small samples or don't follow up on treatment outcomes, and there haven't been any randomized controlled trials to compare hypnosis to other types of interventions. But research is an ongoing process, and hopefully somebody can answer these questions in the future. But regardless, it's worth it to say that hypnosis, like any psychological intervention, is not going to be a good fit for everybody. Like other therapies, it often takes multiple sessions and ongoing practice to get the long-lasting results that people are usually looking for. If I'm being honest, I'm coming out of this video actually being more interested in hypnosis than when I started. I mean, sure, it's got a checkered past and a very weird past. Perhaps its underpinnings aren't as exciting as we thought they were initially, but it seems like it actually might be a helpful tool for the people who are interested in it, who have the issues which hypnosis would be helpful for. Which, to be honest, could be a lot of people. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, that covers a big group right there. So yeah, I guess call me a hypnosis convert now. I'm on board. I didn't think I'd be here, but I'm sorry to disappoint, I guess. Or perhaps thanks for welcoming me, depending on who's watching this. In any case, I'd love to hear your comments down below. Even though this was a pretty long video, I still feel like I only scratched the surface, and I'm sure that there's tons of stuff that I missed, so let me know. But I will give a gentle suggestion, which is to be kind. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm Micah. Think about it.